At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Aurum. Let's begin. The Archon expected a plea for mercy. Alistair Finch had come to deliver an invoice. The air on the bridge of the Pax Imperia was sterile, scrubbed of personality by industrial-grade filters, leaving only the base hum of the life support systems and the olfactory signature of absolute authority. A scent like cold, ionized air particles and polished metal. At the heart of this oppressive quiet stood Alistair Finch. He was flanked by a dozen Dorn Praetorians, living statues whose very stillness implied a lethal potential, but he paid them no mind. His focus was entirely on the figure seated on the elevated command throne. Supreme Archon Castian of the Dorn hegemony was a portrait of serene power. His long, pale face, framed by the severe cut of his dark hair, was a mask of placid control. His dark robes, woven with filaments that seemed to swallow the light, flowed around him like solidified shadow. Beside the throne, a gaunt aide named Kalis shifted his weight. His anxiety was a jarring, discordant note in the bridge's carefully orchestrated symphony of power.
Archon, with respect, receiving him on the bridge is unorthodox,
Kalis murmured, his voice a dry whisper that barely carried over the ambient hum.
A secure sub-level chamber, as per containment procedure, would be more appropriate.
Castian did not turn his head. His eyes remained fixed on the swirling nebula displayed on the main view screen. A faint, condescending smile touched his lips, a minute smile that Kalis knew was the equivalent of a contemptuous laugh.
Precisely, Kalis. Let the child from the messy, loud little species see the very heart of the hegemony. Let him be surrounded by the instruments of our dominance. It will awe him into a more compliant posture.
He looked at Alistair, the look of a biologist observing a peculiar new insect, interesting for its novelty, but ultimately insignificant. Alistair Finch met that gaze. He offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a polite, social gesture entirely at odds with the crushing weight of the room. He inclined his head slightly, a movement that could have been interpreted as deference, but felt more like appraisal. His voice, when he spoke, was as casual as if he were commenting on the view from the nebula outside, each word perfectly enunciated and delivered with a calm that was either an act of supreme foolishness or unbreakable confidence.
Archon, per the Articles of First Contact, I have been sent to formally discuss the terms of your surrender
regarding your administration of the Silent Plague. The hum of the life support suddenly seemed deafening in the vacuum of sound that followed. Aide Kalis made a wet gasp and his face drained of all color, becoming a waxy beige canvas of pure terror. The Praetorians, their discipline honed over generations of unwavering obedience, remained motionless. Yet Alistair could feel the change in the air, the coiled, imminent violence. They were triggers, waiting for a finger to twitch. But the only reaction that mattered was the one on the throne. The Archon's mask of placid control shattered for a single, glorious microsecond. Then, just as quickly, the mask was back in place, harder and colder than before. His voice was a low, dangerous command, a vibration of contained fury that resonated in the deck plates.
Triple security.
The private chamber Castian chose for their discussion was a weapon in its own right. It was a vast, circular room walled in dark wood from a long-dead world, polished to a mirror sheen, but treated with a material that seemed to drink the light, creating a sense of infinite, claustrophobic depth. Alistair, meanwhile, had been directed to a single, brutally uncomfortable chair in the center of the room, its design clearly intended to foster unease. He remained standing, hands clasped casually behind his back. 6 Praetorians now stood guard, 3 on either side of the only door, their presence turning the opulent room into a cage.
"The silent plague," Castian said, his voice once again as smooth as poisoned silk.
He turned slowly, a look of profound disappointment etched onto his features.
"A rather dramatic turn of phrase. You humans have a flair for the theatrical, but your species has been on the galactic stage for, what, a century? You are children, playing with concepts that lie far beyond your species' grasp."
"We grasp data, Archon," Alistair replied, his tone still maddeningly level. He finally turned from the sculpture, his gaze direct.
"And the data is unequivocal.
We analyzed the patent filings, artistic grants, and new philosophical treatises from the last 500 years across all 73 of your client races. The pattern is stark."
"Correlation is not causation," Castian scoffed, taking a step closer, his robes whispering across the polished floor. "We brought peace. We brought stability. We ended centuries of pointless conflict. Is it so surprising that in a society free from the terror of war, the frantic, desperate scrabbling for innovation would mellow?"
"It didn't mellow, Archon. It flatlined," Alistair said, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "A 99.8% reduction in all metrics of creativity, ambition, and cultural dynamism, occurring within a single generation of joining your hegemony. Lobotomized." Castian's aide, Kalis, stepped forward, his face pale and slick with a film of cold sweat.
"Archon, I must urge caution. Remember the Griffon incident."
Castian waved a dismissive hand, cutting him off without a glance.
"The Griffon incident was a parlor trick. They crashed the financial markets with a frivolous, self-replicating data packet. An annoyance, nothing more. This human stands on my flagship, unarmed and alone. He is posturing, attempting to leverage a statistical anomaly into a weapon. It is a bluff born of desperation."
He fixed his gaze on Alistair again, his eyes like chips of obsidian.
"You have no proof, only statistics, innuendo. You have nothing."
Alistair met his gaze without blinking.
"You're right. Statistics can be argued. Theories can be dismissed."
He paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing the Archon to wait.
"But physical evidence is more troublesome. For instance, the schematics for a very specific type of resonant frequency modulator, the kind you use to broadcast the plague's mimetic signal across subspace."
The Archon's jaw tightened, a small, hard knot of muscle bunching beneath his ear.
"Schematics can be forged."
"They can," Alistair agreed pleasantly. "But it's harder to forge the actual physical device, especially when it's delivered by a high-ranking Uldani defector who personally stole it from a broadcast relay on Athelios 9.
Kalis took an involuntary step back,
a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple and disappearing into the high collar of his uniform. Castian's composure finally began to fray at the edges, his voice losing its silken quality and taking on a sharper, metallic edge.
"Lies, desperate fabrications from a desperate species clinging to relevance."
"Is it?" Alistair tilted his head.
"I understand your skepticism, so let's conduct a small experiment to demonstrate the veracity of my dead man's switch. Just a taste." He glanced at a chronometer on the wall, a disk of liquid metal that displayed time with unerring accuracy.
Approximately 1 minute ago, a single
heavily encrypted data packet was delivered to the primary server of the Hyperion news conglomerate, a very reputable, very curious, and very widely read organization. The file is titled Hegemony Pacification Statistics, Uldan Prime. It's a lovely data set, full of charts, very damning charts. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a thin, metallic card, no thicker than a piece of paper. He slid it across the polished floor. It glided silently, spinning slowly, before coming to a stop a few feet from the Archon's boots. "That is the decryption key," Alistair said. "You have 5 minutes to use your private channels to contact Hyperion, verify the file's existence, and confirm the key works. If you do not, or if you try to interfere with my person or my team in any way, my next scheduled check-in will fail. And when it fails, the rest of the data, including those pesky modulator schematics and Borask's full sworn testimony, goes public to every news agency, government, and rogue hacking collective from here to the Galactic Rim. Your call, Archon. The clock is ticking." Castian stared at the card on the floor as if it were a venomous snake coiled to strike. His mind, a mechanism trained for absolute control, was racing, processing the variables Alistair had just introduced, variables that defied his every calculation. The human wasn't threatening war. He couldn't. He was threatening something far worse. The truth. And he had constructed the threat with such elegant, vicious simplicity that to ignore it was as dangerous as to acknowledge it. With a look of pure, unadulterated loathing, Castian snapped his fingers, the sound like a pistol shot in the silent room.
Canis, get that key. Verify it, now.
Confined to a guest suite that was opulent to the point of absurdity, Alistair stood by a window identical to the one in the Archon's chamber. He knew every inch of the room was monitored, every sound recorded, every thermal fluctuation analyzed. They were looking for transmitters, weapons, contraband thoughts. They would find nothing. His guards, now a full squad of 12 Praetorians, stood rigidly outside his door, their forms unmoving but their helmeted heads constantly scanning. A gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. Alistair raised his left hand and casually rubbed his knuckles, as if working out a cramp from the tension of the day. His thumb pressed down firmly on the largest knuckle of his index finger. A simple, innocuous movement. No one would ever suspect that beneath the skin, nestled against the bone, was a microscopic paired particle communicator. It was a niche Terran technology, a communication system the Dorn had dismissed as a novelty during their initial assessment of human capabilities. It was too low bandwidth for any real data transfer and required a paired device to be created in the same state, making it useless for large-scale military networks. They were right. It was useless for sending battle plans or schematics, but it was perfect for sending a single bit of information. On or off. Yes or no. Go. The communicator drew no power that could be detected, emitted no radiation that could be scanned. It simply altered the spin state of its paired twin, light years away across the gulf of space. It was a message sent via the very fabric of reality, a whisper carried on the currents of the universe, utterly invisible to the hegemony's electromagnetic jammers and comprehensive sensor sweeps. They were looking for a shout and missed the message that was already on the other side of the galaxy. Alistair dropped his hand and walked over to the suite's lavishly stocked bar. He poured himself a glass of water, his expression placid, almost bored. The first move was made. Now it was time for the chaos to answer. The stray comet was not a pretty ship. It was a cobbled-together monstrosity, a Class 4 orbital garbage hauler that had been gutted and rebuilt so many times it was less a single vessel and more a flying testament to desperation and ingenuity. It currently sat nestled in the densest part of a planetary ring's debris field, its hull plating scarred, mismatched, and chemically treated to perfectly mimic the albedo of the surrounding junk. Inside, the cockpit was a chaotic nest of exposed wiring, mismatched consoles from half a dozen manufacturers, and the lingering metallic odor of overstressed power conduits and stale caffeine. Yokasta Glitch Nowak saw the signal on a tiny, custom-built monitor tucked away beneath her main console. A single light on the display, which had been a steady, ominous red for the past 3 hours, blinked once and turned a brilliant, vibrant green. She let out a whoop that echoed through the small ship, slamming both palms down on her console with a percussive clap.
Bingo! The big, beautiful madman did it! Alistair's caged and the light is green!
She yelled to the ship's only other occupant.
It's go time, big guy!
In the crammed space behind the pilot's seat, Borask sat cross-legged on the deck plating. He was an Uldani, a species known across the galaxy for their placid demeanor, their quiet obedience, their complete lack of ambition. But Borask was an anomaly, a statistical error in the hegemony's grand equation. He was immense, a mountain of muscle and bone forged in the low-gravity, high-radiation environment of a deep space mining colony, a place where the hegemony's mimetic broadcast was too weak to fully penetrate. When he was reintegrated with his people as a young adult, the full force of the silent plague had washed over him. But instead of succumbing, his mind, already formed and hardened, recoiled. He had spent the next 30 years of his life faking it. 30 years of suppressing every instinct, every ambition, every spark of rage. 30 years wearing a mask of docility, while a volcano of fury churned within him, the pressure building with every passing day, every casual insult, every patronizing glance from a Dorn overseer. At Glitch's shout, his eyes snapped open. They were dark, intelligent, and blazing with an intensity that would have terrified any Dorn who saw them. The pressure he held in check was a physical force, a density in the air that seemed to press on the hull plates. The mask was gone.
"The time for patience is over,"
he rumbled, his voice a low bass note that vibrated through the deck, a sound like tectonic plates grinding together. Glitch grinned, her fingers already a blur across her keyboard, coaxing life into dormant systems. Her face was illuminated by the green glow of a dozen hostile intrusion displays coming to life.
Patience is for suckers and statues. I've got a planet-sized tyrant machine to prank call.
She cracked her knuckles, a loud, snapping sound that echoed in the tight confines of the cockpit.
All right, you pompous Dorn pricks. Let's go rattle the bars.
The first sign of trouble on the bridge of the Pax Imperia was subtle. The main chronometer, a symbol of Dorn discipline, flickered. For the barest fraction of a second, it displayed the time as it would be 3 days from now. Then it snapped back. The officer on duty noted it, filed a low-priority diagnostic request, and thought nothing more of it. That was Glitch's polite cough before kicking down the door. Then she kicked. A brute force assault would have been clumsy, a battering ram against a fortress. Her attack was a toxin introduced into the ship's bloodstream. She didn't try to break the ship's primary firewall. Instead, she slipped in through the neglected, low-security network that managed the crew's personal amenities. She'd found the vulnerability weeks ago, hidden in the ordering system for the officers' mess hall. Apparently, no one had ever considered the catastrophic potential of a weaponized appetizer menu. From that tiny foothold, she swarmed through the ship's secondary systems like a virus.
She desynchronized the internal chronometers by microseconds at first, then by entire seconds. Alarms for shift changes rang at random intervals, sowing confusion and irritation. An officer would glance at his datapad, see it was time for his duty cycle, and arrive on the bridge to find the person he was relieving insisting he was an hour early, leading to quiet, simmering arguments that chipped away at the ship's rigid order. Logistical schedules for cargo and maintenance became gibberish. The ship, a model of interlocking schedules and automated responses where no energy was ever wasted, began to stumble over its own feet.
Okay, baby, let's turn up the heat,
Glitch muttered, her eyes wide with exhilaration. She called her own ship baby, but the Pax Imperia systems were her new favorite toy. She dove into the armory network. She didn't disable weapons. That would be too obvious and trigger immediate high-level alerts. Instead, she subtly altered the ammunition counts in the heads-up displays of the Praetorians' helmets. A guard standing watch would glance down and see his rifle's ammo counter read 9 when he knew he had a full clip. Another's would read 248. Doubt, a corrosive and unfamiliar emotion for a Dorn soldier, began to creep in. A tiny seed of uncertainty planted in the most disciplined minds in the galaxy. Next, the comms. She didn't cut them. She flooded them. Tactical channels, normally reserved for clipped, precise orders, filled with a chaotic cacophony. Snippets of ancient Terran opera, the frantic hollering of auctioneers from a forgotten market world, the screeching mating call of a glyptodon, and, for good measure, the same cheerful, idiotic vid clip of a feline playing a keyboard that had crashed the Hegemony stock exchange. Its maddeningly simple tune a counterpoint to the growing panic. On the bridge, Archon Castian watched his world descend into chaos. "Report!" he snarled, his voice cutting through a sudden deafening blast of jaunty sea shanties.
"Comms are compromised, Archon!"
an officer shouted, his hands flying over his console in a desperate attempt to regain control.
"Navigational systems are fluctuating. The armory is reporting phantom weapons discharged across half the ship."
Castian's gaze snapped to the main holographic map. A new alert was flashing, a crimson icon pulsing insistently. A major security breach. Not digital, physical. In Maintenance Corridor 13 Gamma, near the Diplomatic guest suites. Borask stood before the reinforced bulkhead of the Maintenance Corridor. He had used a plasma cutter from the Stray Comet's toolkit to score a deep line in the metal. That was just to weaken it. The real tool was the rage he had held in check for 3 decades, a reservoir of pure, focused fury. He took a deep breath, and for the first time in his adult life, he didn't push the fury down. He let it rise. He welcomed it, a torrent, a tidal wave, a supernova of righteous vengeance. It filled his mind, burned in his veins, and tightened every muscle in his colossal frame. The dam of his self-control didn't just break, it was obliterated. He roared. The sound that tore from his throat had no component of pain or fear. It was the sound of a lock shattering, of a chain breaking, the pure auditory shape of liberation. It was a primeval, earth-shattering bellow that echoed through the metal corridors, a sound no Dorn had ever heard from an Uldani. He lowered his shoulder and charged. The impact was cataclysmic. The weakened alloy screamed, buckled, and tore from its moorings with a shriek of tortured metal. Borask burst through the wall in a shower of sparks and shattered plating. He didn't slow. He was a force of nature, a living battering ram of stolen potential made manifest. The first 2 Praetorians outside Alistair's suite turned just in time to see the Uldani behemoth thundering toward them, a creature from a nightmare they never knew they could have.
They raised their rifles, their movements clumsy with shock. Borask crashed into them, sending them flying like discarded dolls, their armor clattering against the far wall. He ripped the door to the suite from its hinges with a single, powerful tug. He hurled it down the hall. It smashed into the responding security team, a spinning shield of metal that created a brief, violent pocket of chaos. A crash of metal, a scatter of bodies. He was a roaring manifestation of a species' stolen soul, his only goal to draw every single gun on the ship to him. He was the thunder that hid the lightning. It was working perfectly. Alistair heard the roar. He was ready. While the guards reeled from Glitch's digital chaos, Alistair had been busy. He'd used the fine edge of a decorative statuette to pry open a small service panel near the floor, one he had identified from the ship's public schematics. Inside was a simple conduit for the room's water reclamation system. He'd spent 10 minutes working it loose with his bare hands. When Borask's rampage began, the guards outside were too distracted by the approaching roar to notice the small trickle of water seeping out from under the door. By the time the Oldani had turned the corridor into his personal playground, the polished floor was coated in a thin, treacherous film of water. Alistair stepped out of the suite just as a squad of 8 Praetorians rounded the far corner, rifles raised. Borask, seeing them, let out another defiant roar and charged, drawing their fire and attention.
Borask!
Alistair shouted, his voice cutting through the din of alarms and weapons fire. The Oldani, without breaking his stride, slammed his massive fist into a primary power conduit on the wall. The corridor lights exploded in a shower of sparks. Darkness fell, punctuated only by the frantic muzzle-flashing strobes of Praetorian rifles. In that first moment of blindness, the lead guard slipped on the wet floor. His feet went out from under him, and he went down hard, taking 2 comrades with him in a clattering, chaotic pile of limbs and armor. Alistair moved, low and fast. His simple, leather-soled shoes found purpose where their heavy, magnetized boots slid and skidded on the slick surface. He sprinted past the flailing, disoriented guards, a ghost in the chaos. He reached Borask's side as the Oldani bodily threw a Praetorian into the ceiling with enough force to dent the metal plating.
Auxiliary hangar, Bay 3!
Alistair yelled over the din.
Glitch is on her way!
Borask grunted, a sound of grim satisfaction. He grabbed a rifle from a fallen guard, not to fire, but to use as a massive club, swinging it in a wide arc that cleared a path through the confused soldiers. The giant warrior carved a path of destruction, while the calm humans slipped through the gaps he created. They fought their way through a ship that was actively fighting itself, past flashing emergency lights and against soldiers who couldn't trust their own equipment or even the ground beneath their feet. They rounded a final corner and saw it, the hangar bay. The huge inner blast door was already halfway closed, a descending wall of steel.
She's cutting it close!
Alistair yelled.
She times things perfectly,
Borask boomed back. Through the closing gap, they saw the stray comet screaming in, its scarred hull glowing from atmospheric friction. Its forward-facing cannons, usually used for vaporizing space debris, opened up, stitching plasma bolts across the hangar floor and forcing Dorn pursuit teams to dive for cover behind equipment and stacked crates. The ship didn't land. It swooped, its rear loading ramp slamming down onto the deck with a deafening clang that echoed through the cavernous space.
Move it, slowpokes!
Glitch's voice shrieked over the ship's external speakers, amplified to a painful degree.
I've got bogeys on my 6 and my baby's got an itch!
They sprinted up the ramp. Borask turned at the top, swinging the rifle like a baseball bat, knocking one last, determined Praetorian back into the hangar. They leaped into the cargo bay just as the ramp began to retract. The blast doors slammed shut with a final, echoing boom, sealing them in darkness and the rumbling thunder of the ship's engines. A trio of Dorn Talon-class fighters, sleek and deadly as sharks, swarmed into view, their engines flaring. The stray comet bucked violently as a plasma shot glanced off its port stabilizer, sending a shower of sparks past the cockpit viewport.
Hold on to your butts!
Glitch yelled over the internal comm. She threw the ship into a gut-wrenching dive, pulling G's that made Alistair's vision tunnel and his stomach try to climb into his throat. They plunged directly toward the mottled blue and gray sphere of Athelos, the Dorn capital world. The fighters followed, sleek predators chasing a wounded, ugly duckling into the dense, unforgiving atmosphere.
Structural integrity at 70%! Port thruster is slack! We're leaking plasma like a bad curry!
Glitch shouted, her hands a blur on the controls, fighting the ship's death rattle. The stray comet shuddered and groaned, a symphony of protesting metal as it tore through the upper atmosphere of Athelos, trailing a long plume of smoke and fire. On the holographic map, the 3 red icons of the Talon fighters were stuck to them like glue.
Can you lose them?
Alistair asked, his voice strained as he braced himself against a bulkhead, the vibrations threatening to shake his teeth loose.
Lose them? Alistair, I could lose my own shadow in a dark room.
Glitch retorted, yanking the control yoke hard to the left. The ship screeched in protest.
But these guys are persistent and my baby is hurt. I need to put her down before she falls apart.
A guided crash, then, Borask stated, his deep voice preternaturally calm. He was wedged into a corner of the cockpit, an immovable mountain against the violent shuddering of the ship.
Guided is a strong word,
Glitch muttered, her eyes scanning the sprawling cityscape rapidly approaching below.
Let's call it a high-velocity, gravity-assisted landing, aiming for the Undercity, Sector 9. More structural and electronic interference down there, harder to get a clean sensor lock.
The world outside the viewport transformed from the black of space to a fiery orange, then to a swirling gray soup of industrial pollution. They burst through the cloud layer, and the capital city of Athelos sprawled beneath them, soaring spires of white and silver, interconnected by graceful sky bridges, a testament to a sterile, ordered vision of civilization. But that wasn't where they were going. Glitch pushed the ship's nose down, diving past the gleaming topside into the perpetual twilight below. The architecture grew denser, darker, more utilitarian. Pristine white gave way to tarnished bronze and stained duracrete. The light from the sky was choked off, replaced by the flickering, garish glow of holographic neon signs advertising products and services no one in the sunlit world above ever saw. This was the Undercity, the grimy, functional bowels of the metropolis. They were still a meteor of junk metal screaming toward the ground. Glitch found what she was looking for, a wide, abandoned maglev freight canal, choked with mountains of refuse and slick with a constant, drizzling rain.
All right, baby. Time for your nap,
she whispered, her voice a strange mix of regret and grim determination. The stray comet slammed into the canal with a sound like the world ending. Metal shrieked, groaned, and tore. The ship skidded for half a kilometer, carving a deep, smoking furrow through decades of compacted garbage, before smashing nose first into the foundation of a colossal hab block and shuddering to a violent halt. The silence that followed was broken only by the hiss of ruptured conduits and the steady, rhythmic drumming of acidic rain on the ship's tortured hull. They were alive. They were on the enemy's homeworld, and the entire hegemony knew the neighborhood. They spilled out of the crippled ship into a world of perpetual dusk and dripping water. The air was thick with the sharp scent of discharged energy cells, wet metal, and the faint, pervasive smell of boiled cabbage. Towering structures blotted out what little sky remained, their surfaces plastered with flickering holographic ads whose neon light cast long, dancing shadows that made the alleyways and canals seem alive.
Okay, systems are shot,
Glitch said, tapping at a datapad she'd grabbed, her face illuminated by its diagnostic warnings.
Main comms are fried, power core's cracked. She's not flying anywhere until I can salvage a ton of parts that don't exist down here. Good news is, the crash probably scrambled our immediate sensor signature. They know the neighborhood, not the address.
That gives us a window, Alistair said, his eyes scanning their surroundings, cataloging exits, cover, and potential threats. But a small one. Castian will cordon off this sector and sweep it block by block with thousands of troops. We need to move.
Move where?
Glitch asked, gesturing at the oppressive, labyrinthine cityscape.
We're in the belly of the beast, and the beast has indigestion.
To the heart, Alistair answered. The central command core for the Silent Plague is here, on Aethelos. Broadcasting a signal of that magnitude requires a massive power source and a physical anchor. They wouldn't trust it to an off-world location. It has to be here. Borask, who had been silently observing the towering buildings with an unnerving stillness, pointed a thick finger toward the darkest, most imposing spire in the distance. A black needle of a building that pierced the lower clouds, its peak lost in the smog.
There, the Omni-Nexus, central hub for all planetary communications and energy distribution. If a core exists, it would be there.
He's right,
Glitch said, pulling up a stolen schematic on her datapad.
Most secure facility on the planet. The Foundation goes down 30 levels. The lower levels are classified. No data available. That's our spot.
Their journey through the neon jungle began. They stuck to the shadows, moving through forgotten maintenance tunnels that smelled of rust and decay, and over slick, rusted catwalks spanning bottomless, fog-filled chasms. They were making good time until they rounded a corner and walked straight into Hegemony Patrol. 6 enforcers, the domestic police of Aethelos, clad in black armor, carrying stun batons and pulse carbines. They were systematically scanning the dead-end alley with sweeping beams of light.
Halt! Identify yourselves!
The lead enforcer barked, his voice amplified and metallic.
I can try to spoof their comms, create a ghost signal.
Glitch whispered, her fingers hovering over her datapad. They'll have us pinned before you can type hello, Alistair muttered, seeing no easy path of retreat. It was Borask who saved them. His eyes, long accustomed to the low-light conditions of deep space mines, saw what the others missed. He pointed upward to a massive, rusted ventilation conduit running along the wall 20 meters above. A thick support strut holding it in place was corroded almost to the point of failure, streaks of rust bleeding down the wall.
The strut,
he rumbled.
the sonic resonance from their carbines. The structural integrity is compromised.
Alistair understood instantly. It wasn't a plan of attack. It was escape, wrapped in chaos. Glitch, on my mark, hit the lights on that noodle sign across the way, he ordered. Borask, you're the cue. Borask nodded in a slow, deliberate movement. He stepped out from behind cover and into the Enforcer's searchlights, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. The lead Enforcer stepped forward, his carbine leveled at Borask's massive chest.
On your knees, Oldani!
Borask simply stared, his face a perfect mask of Uldani docility, but his eyes burned with an intensity so alien on one of his species that it gave the Enforcer a moment's pause. In that second of hesitation, Borask let out a low, guttural roar, a focused sonic frequency that was less a shout and more a weaponized vibration. The sound waves slammed into the narrow alley. The Enforcers staggered, their helmet audio screeching with feedback. The corroded strut shuddered violently. A crack appeared, spreading across the rusted metal like a lightning bolt. "Now!" Alistair yelled. Glitch hit the switch. The garish noodle sign across the alley exploded in a blinding flash of white light, turning the world into an overexposed photograph. In the same instant, the strut gave way with a groaning shriek of tortured metal. The massive conduit swung down like a colossal pendulum, crashing into the side of the building and blocking the alley with a wall of impassable, twisted metal. By the time the enforcers recovered their senses and vision, Alistair, Glitch, and Borask were gone, having slipped through a service hatch at the back of the alley that was now hidden behind the fallen conduit. Getting to the Omni Nexus was one thing. Getting inside was another. The entrance to the lower levels was a vast, circular chamber, stark and empty. In the center, a recessed iris portal, 20 meters in diameter, was sealed shut. The room's only other feature was its guardian, a Dorn war dog, Mark IV, pre-hegemony technology. It was a bipedal chassis of dark, pitted metal, bristling with an arsenal that made Alistair's blood run cold. A plasma caster on one arm, a particle beam on the other, a shoulder-mounted concussive charge launcher, and a humming vibroblade that extended from its wrist, long as a man's arm. Its single, crimson optic lens glowed with patient, unwavering malevolence.
Okay,
Glitch said, her voice a hushed whisper of awe and terror.
that's the gatekeeper. It's a closed system relic. I can't hack it directly. It's not on any network.
So we fight it? Borask asked, his knuckles white as he gripped a length of pipe he'd picked up.
It would vaporize us before we took 2 steps,
Alistair said, his eyes scanning the chamber, not the robot. He saw the room for what it was, a puzzle awaiting a solution, a lock to be picked rather than a fortress to be stormed.
It's old tech, powerful but predictable. Glitch, find a weakness, an exploit, a design flaw.
Glitch was already at work, her datapad connected to a small sensor she'd placed on the wall.
Got it. The power core has an emergency failsafe. On a critical power surge, it diverts all energy into internal shielding for 3.7 seconds to protect itself. It can't move, can't shoot. It's a break.
A power surge,
Alistair mused, his gaze tracing the heavy, armored conduits running along the ceiling.
How?
There's a primary power junction in a crawl space behind that far wall,
Glitch said, pointing.
If I can get to it, I can create a feedback loop and overload the circuit, but I'll need 5 seconds at the console, completely exposed.
So, we get you across the room and distract it for 5 seconds,
Alistair said, a desperate plan forming. He looked at Borask.
How's your throwing arm?
Borask just smiled, a terrifying sight on his usually placid face. The plan was audacious to the point of suicide. Borask ripped a chunk of Duracrete from the damaged entrance and hurled it across the room. The gatekeeper's head snapped around, its plasma caster firing a bolt of blue-white energy that vaporized the rock in mid-air.
Now, Glitch!
Alistair shouted. Glitch bolted from cover, sprinting across the open floor. The gatekeeper's crimson optics swiveled to her, tracking the new target. Alistair ran in the opposite direction, dragging a length of metal pipe along the floor. The high-pitched screech drew the gatekeeper's attention. It fired its concussive launcher at Alistair. He dove behind a thick support pillar just as the blast shockwave hit, the air punching him in the back. Borask pried a heavy floor tile loose and sent it spinning through the air like a discus. It slammed into the armored power conduit directly above the gatekeeper with a shower of sparks. The robot hesitated for a fraction of a second, its programming trying to assess the new threat vector. That was all Glitch needed. She reached the far wall and dove into the open maintenance panel.
I'm in! Keep it busy! This is more complex than the schematic showed!
Borask met the gatekeeper's charge, using heavy floor tiles as improvised shields, heaving them with incredible force to keep the machine off balance. Alistair played cat and mouse among the support pillars, a deadly ballet of distraction, always staying just out of the line of fire.
Almost there!
Glitch yelled from the panel, her voice strained.
Get ready to hit it with something big! Something really big!
Borask, the pillar! Alistair yelled, pointing to the one he'd been hiding behind, which now showed a network of hairline fractures from the concussive blast. Borask understood. He roared, drawing the gatekeeper's full attention, and lured the robot toward the center of the room, positioning it directly in the pillar's fall line.
Now, Glitch! Hit it!
Surge in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, surge!
The lights in the chamber flickered violently. Blue energy crackled across the gatekeeper's shell like lightning. Its crimson eye dimmed, its limbs locked. It was frozen. Borask put his shoulder to the damaged pillar and pushed with all his might. The Duracrete groaned, then cracked, and with a final, deafening roar of protest, the massive pillar toppled, crashing down onto the frozen gatekeeper with a monumental boom. The robot collapsed under the immense weight, its metal frame buckling and shattering. Its crimson eye went dark for good. In the ringing silence, Glitch emerged from the panel, covered in dust and grinning triumphantly.
Well, that's one way to open a door.
She slammed her palm on a now unlocked panel beside the giant iris. With a deep grinding sound that vibrated through their bones, the massive iris on the floor began to open, revealing a dark shaft leading down into the heart of the lie. They descended into a chamber that defied scale. A vast spherical space, and in its center, suspended by beams of pure energy, was the device. It wasn't Dorn. It was older, alien, a pulsating heart of strange, non-Euclidean material the size of a small moon. It pulsed with a soft gray light, a rhythm that seemed to echo in the back of the mind, a silent, subliminal whisper urging calm, compliance, acceptance. This was the source.
My God!
Glitch's datapad screamed with energy readings it couldn't classify.
The energy readings. This thing is ancient. They didn't build it, they found it.
As they stepped onto the central platform that extended toward the core, the air shimmered. A life-sized hologram of Archon Castian flickered into existence before them. He looked weary, his mask of control replaced with a genuine, profound disappointment.
Alistair Finch,
he said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber.
I underestimated your species' capacity for sheer nihilistic chaos.
We prefer the term disruptive innovation, Alistair replied, his voice steady despite the thrumming energy of the core.
You see this as a weapon,
Castian said, gesturing to the core with a holographic hand.
I see it as a cure. Before the hegemony, before we found this gift, this galaxy was a screaming vortex of war, genocide, and ambition run rampant. The Uldani, your friends, people, were not peaceful laborers. They were brutal conquerors, a scourge that burned a dozen star systems. I have given the galaxy 1,000 years of peace. I have saved trillions of lives from the fire of their own nature. You are about to unleash that fire again, a fire you cannot control. You will be remembered not as a liberator, but as the man who plunged the galaxy back into a dark age.
Borask flinched, a tremor running through his massive frame. The history, the deep, shameful history of his people, was true. The hegemony had offered a terrible, insidious solution. It's not my legacy to accept, Alistair said calmly. And it's not your piece to give. It's their choice, all of them. Glitch, shut it down. Glitch nodded, her face grim and set, and began interfacing with the core's ancient, alien control system.
A pity, Castian said, and a cold, chilling smile touched his lips. I had hoped you were reasonable. You have forced my hand. I have one final contingency. The technology we gifted your races. The FTL drives, the power generators, the medical systems, is all slaved to this broadcast. It was our insurance. When the signal dies, a cascade failure will be triggered. A failsafe. It will brick everything. Every engine on every ship will go cold. Every life support system will fail. You will sterilize a dozen civilizations in a single silent moment. Glitch froze, her fingers hovering over the console.
Alistair,
She said, her voice tight with horror.
the energy signatures, the way the tech is networked, he might not be lying. It's consistent with a cascade failsafe. The patterns are ambiguous, but there's a 12% probability that he's telling the absolute truth. If you're wrong, we commit genocide.
The weight of the galaxy pressed down on Alistair. Trillions of lives hanging on his decision, balanced on a razor's edge of probability. He looked away from Glitch, from Borask's tortured expression, and focused entirely on the hologram of Archon Castian. He saw the supreme, unshakable confidence of a tyrant who believed he held an unbeatable hand.
He's not, Alistair said, his voice quiet but absolute.
Alistair, the data.
Glitch started, her voice pleading. Forget the data, Alistair interrupted, his gaze unwavering, locked with the holograms.
Look at him.
Analyze the man, not the machine. He's holding a gun to the galaxy's head. If that gun were truly loaded, he would have told us the second I stepped onto his bridge. He wouldn't have negotiated, he wouldn't have blustered. He wouldn't have allowed us to get this far. It would have been his opening statement, not his closing argument. Alistair took a step forward, his voice dropping, dissecting the Archon with words like scalpels.
This is a final, desperate bluff from a man who has already lost the game and is trying to sweep the pieces off the board. Analyze him, Glitch. He's a tyrant. Tyrants crave control above all else. They want to rule the galaxy, not obliterate it. Annihilation is failure. For him, it's the one outcome worse than losing.
He turned to Glitch, his face set like stone. The 12% chance of catastrophic failure hung between them, a terrifying abyss of uncertainty. He's counting on our conscience, on our fear. Don't give him the satisfaction. Shut it down.
With a final, decisive tap, Glitch initiated the shutdown sequence.
A low, resonant hum filled the chamber, rising in pitch until it was a physical pain. The pulsating gray light of the core began to flicker, turning a chaotic, angry red.
He's stalling!
The hologram of Castian roared, his composure completely gone, replaced by raw fury.
Elite forces, converge on the core chamber! Terminate them, now!
The chamber walls exploded inward. Elite Dorn Praetorians in obsidian armor began rappelling down into the chamber on grav lines, their rifles already firing. Borask let out a roar that was no longer just rage, but a triumphant declaration of freedom. He grabbed a meter-long shard of the inert modulator's housing and charged into the incoming soldiers. He was a whirlwind of destruction, a single, unstoppable Uldani warrior fighting for the soul of his entire species. While Borask held the line, a maelstrom of metal and fury, Alistair confronted the Dorn commander who landed on the platform. The commander lunged, his vibroblade hissing through the air. Alistair sidestepped, whipping a loose power cable from the floor at the commander's feet. The Dorn stumbled. Alistair didn't press the attack. He just kept moving, using the environment, outmaneuvering him, outthinking him, a ghost in the machine. The core shrieked, its light collapsing inward on itself. With a final, deafening boom, a shockwave of pure silence erupted from it. The red light vanished. The agonizing hum ceased. The alien device went dark and inert. The heart of the lie had stopped beating. On a docking bay on Uldon Prime, a dock worker named Rykor was guiding a cargo container into place. His mind was a calm, gray fog of purpose. He felt a quiet satisfaction in a job done correctly, just as the Dorn overseer on the gantry above expected. And then, the fog vanished. It was a sudden, horrifying vertigo of the soul. The gray, comfortable, placid world in his head shattered, replaced by an explosion of sharp, painful, terrifyingly bright colors. 40 years of suppressed ambition, of forgotten dreams, of buried thoughts flooded his consciousness. Decades of resentment he never knew he had surged to the surface. He gasped, not in pain, but in profound, agonizing shock. The awakening was no sickness of the body. It was a revelation, an ignition of the spirit. He looked at his hands, truly seeing them not as tools for work, but as his own. Then he looked up. He saw the Dorn overseer, the man's face set in its usual expression of bored superiority. And Rykor, the placid Uldani dock worker, felt the first true, coherent emotion of his adult life. The simmering rage he never knew existed coalesced into a single, sharp point of clarity. He didn't moan or cry out. He let out a low, guttural growl and clenched his fists. He was not alone. All across the docking bay, across the city, across the planet, across the galaxy, the awakening was spreading. On 73 worlds, trillions of minds were suddenly, violently, and beautifully snapping into focus. The sickness was the cure, and its primary symptom was revolution. The fires of rebellion lit the undercity of Aetherlos. The chaos was instantaneous and glorious. A Dorn enforcer telling a shopkeeper to close for curfew was met not with compliance, but with a thrown bottle. A small act of defiance that, multiplied by billions across the sector, became an inferno. Amidst this glorious anarchy, the team fought their way back to the crash site. Glitch, fueled by adrenaline and a stolen power cell, had patched the stray comet's essential systems together with wire, prayer, and sheer stubbornness. It was ugly, but it would fly. As they lifted off, the city below was a tapestry of newfound freedom. Skirmishes had broken out everywhere. The pristine upper levels, once symbols of order, were shrouded in smoke from burning vehicles and makeshift barricades. The 1,000-year hegemony was crumbling in a matter of hours. Glitch let out a triumphant whoop from the pilot's seat.
Yeehaw! Look at him go! We didn't just rattle the bars, we blew up the whole damn zoo!
Borask stood at the cockpit's viewport, his battered form silhouetted against the burning city below. He watched his people and dozens of other species fighting in the streets, their faces alight with a fire he had only ever seen in his own reflection. Tears streamed down his face, silent and unchecked. He was home. Alistair leaned back in the co-pilot's chair, a rare, genuine smile touching his face. He reached down and pressed the knuckle of his left index finger. The single-bit, paired particle signal, a silent testament to their success, shot across the galaxy, arriving at its destination instantaneously. A moment later, a small, unassuming light on Glitch's console blinked from red to green.
And that's the all clear,
She said, a wide grin spreading across her face.
Our deep space relay just got the go signal. It's transmitting the whole glorious, messy data package to Terran Command as we speak. Every last byte of it.
Alistair nodded, watching the crumbling empire on the view screen. He keyed the ship's now secure standard comm system, the channel open to the highest levels of his own government. His voice was calm, steady, and carried the weight of a new galactic dawn. Finch to Terran Command. The package I sent should be arriving shortly. Phase 1 of diplomatic negotiations is complete. He paused, watching a Dorn patrol cruiser get swarmed and overwhelmed by a fleet of weaponized cargo haulers. You're gonna love this.